It started with a quiet Tuesday morning and a knocked-over recycling bin, but I should have known that living in Crestwood Meadows meant quiet was merely a suggestion. My name is Alex Turner, 42, freelance graphic designer and weekend hobbyist drone pilot. I had just stepped outside to retrieve my morning coffee when Marlene DeWitt, the HOA president and self-appointed arbiter of morality, barreled down the sidewalk like a hurricane in stilettos, waving a clipboard with the fury of someone who believed the universe revolved around her email alerts. She was wearing a neon pink sun visor that said Queen Bee in rhinestones, a floral apron splattered with what I assumed was yesterday's pancake syrup, and nothing below the knees but white socks and Birkenstocks. "Alex, emergency! I need your leaf blower immediately!" she shouted, her voice shattering the serene hum of cicadas in the background. I raised an eyebrow and pointed at my hands, still holding my coffee mug and half a stack of yesterday's mail. "Your emergency or mine?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Her expression hardened, mascara running in rivulets, and she stomped toward my garage, kicking a potted fern aside with dramatic flair. It wasn't the first time Marlene had stormed into my life under the pretense of some community crisis, and judging by her prior behavior, it wouldn't be the last. I moved aside to let her access my garage, where my drone equipment and assorted power tools were neatly arranged, and she immediately began rummaging through everything like a toddler in a toy store, exclaiming about how dangerous it was that I stored anything in my driveway that wasn't officially approved by the HOA Manual of Morality. My coffee was abandoned on the driveway, slowly cooling as she sniffed the leaf blower, muttered something about reckless air propulsion hazards, and then attempted to start it without even plugging it in. I sighed, realizing that trying to reason with Marlene in this state was like negotiating with a caffeinated raccoon. 3 days later, a crisp, typed citation appeared on my front door, listing violations so elaborate they seemed designed by Kafka in a particularly vindictive mood. Improper storage of power equipment, visual disruption of neighborhood aesthetic, harmony, lack of participation in the annual HOA spring mixer, and my personal favorite, failure to generate sufficient sidewalk smile output. I ignored the citation at first, assuming it was another episode of Marlene's hobby harassment, but soon the newsletters arrived. Every page contained coded reminders aimed at me. Sidewalks are for smiling, not for blocking with clutter. Lack of participation can lower communal morale. And in the margins, doodles of bees wearing crowns that I assume were meant to represent Marlene. Then came the weekend community improvement events, scheduled directly in front of my garage. Chairs, folding tables, banners, and a rented fog machine transformed my driveway into what she called a civic engagement zone. Someone was grilling sausages at 6:30 a.m. Another neighbor had brought a karaoke machine, and a third was attempting to juggle flaming torches. I politely asked the volunteers to move so I could retrieve my drone equipment, only for Marlene to appear, clipboard in hand, insisting that the schedule had been posted on the HOA bulletin board for 2 weeks, though I later confirmed she had only stapled it at 2:17 a.m. the night before. My polite refusal to participate in forced bonding exercises became a personal affront, and Marlene began recruiting other board members into her campaign. Harold, the treasurer, was convinced that my drone flying caused property values to wobble. Linda, the secretary, added new regulations about permissible outdoor sound levels and acceptable coffee mug colors. Each week brought a new rule, more absurd than the last, and Marlene even hired a photography student to document my driveway, claiming that my perfectly organized tool racks constituted a hazardous visual landscape. The student, a bewildered college kid named Riley, later confessed that he had been told the images were for safety compliance, not for a vendetta, and apologized repeatedly. The tipping point came one Saturday morning when Marlene decided to inspect my property herself. The security camera I had installed for monitoring drone flights captured her marching onto my driveway, flapping her neon sun visor like a flag of conquest, inspecting my toolbox as if it were a weapon of mass destruction. She lifted my extension, cords, sniffed the ends, and muttered about electrical malfeasance. She then spent 10 minutes trying to start my drone with the charger for my leaf blower, ultimately giving up and leaving behind a laminated driveway responsibility contract taped to my front gate, along with half a pink smoothie that dripped onto the concrete. By this point, my neighbors had begun noticing, and within hours of posting the footage on the community Facebook page, messages flooded in. "That's my missing picnic basket in the background," one wrote. "She borrowed my folding chair without asking," said another. Most amusingly, someone posted, "Why is she trying to charge the drone with the leaf blower cord?" The narrative snowballed as more residents shared stories of Marlene commandeering personal property, inspecting for morale infractions, and creating imaginary community emergencies that existed solely in her mind. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Marlene arrived, still in her floral apron, proclaiming that it wasn't trespassing if one was morally compelled to enforce neighborhood standards. She defended her smoothie as a necessary health assessment and claimed the driveway responsibility contract was a gift, not a demand. The room was silent as Inspector Dan Rivera from County Code Enforcement reviewed the footage and listed all violations: criminal trespass, harassment, attempted theft of property under false pretenses, and violation of multiple HOA bylaws. Marlene's lawyer, a young man who appeared to have just discovered the concept of oral argument, attempted to plead a civic emergency defense, only to be cut off by Inspector Rivera, who dryly stated that civic emergency did not include drinking other people's smoothies and rearranging toolboxes. The board voted unanimously to remove Marlene from her position, ban her from organizing any community events for a year, and require her to complete 80 hours of community mediation and a seminar on property boundaries. That afternoon, the footage went viral in the neighborhood Facebook group, with neighbors laughing, crying, and posting memes about neon visors, floral aprons, and rogue smoothie diplomacy. As Marlene's fines and penalties stacked up, she was seen wandering the streets muttering about injustice, still wearing her apron, still clutching her clipboard, and still convinced that she had single-handedly saved Crestwood Meadows from chaos, oblivious to the fact that the chaos she created had become a legend in its own right. The week following Marlene's public humiliation felt almost peaceful, but I should have known better than to trust quiet in Crestwood Meadows. My driveway, once a simple zone of drone landings and neatly stacked recycling bins, had become a testing ground for Marlene's residual influence. She had not only been removed from the HOA board, but apparently she had also recruited a small coalition of disgruntled neighbors who shared her belief that my driveway activities were a direct threat to suburban harmony. One Tuesday morning, I stepped outside to find tiny laminated signs taped to my garage, each declaring things like drone flights must achieve minimum smiles per pass and coffee consumption while using power tools requires notification of nearby residents. At first I laughed, but the humor faded when a drone flew low and close to my face carrying a note from one of her supporters. "This is a safety check. Smile, Alex. Smile." I was beginning to understand the full scope of Marlene's influence, even in absentia. Then came the incident with the neighborhood cat, Sir Whiskers, who somehow became an unwitting participant in Marlene's campaign. He wandered into my driveway while I was preparing to test a new drone rotor, only for a small crowd of neighbors, to materialize across the street, holding clipboards and looking anxiously at Sir Whiskers as if he were some endangered species subject to Marlene's bylaws. I tried to explain that it was just a cat, but anyone who had ever lived near Marlene knows that facts are secondary to perceived infractions. That afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find my front yard beautified again, this time with potted plants, garden gnomes, and a mini inflatable pool filled with pink water balloons, all arranged in perfect geometrical chaos. A note was taped to my garage that read, "Civic Enjoyment Enhancement, as per Marlene DeWitt." I stared at it, utterly dumbfounded, before realizing that it was impossible to argue with someone who believed their moral compass superseded logic, physics, and common sense. Around that time, the HOA board scheduled what they called a neighborhood audit, a voluntary inspection event that conveniently coincided with my planned drone demonstration for some visiting friends. Marlene's replacement as president, a cautious woman named Linda Chen, seemed reluctant to enforce the event, but feared Marlene's online reach and leftover allies. So when 17 residents appeared with clipboards, measuring tapes, and suspiciously cheerful attitudes, I knew it was time to take a stand. I calmly explained that the audit could not proceed without prior written notice, as required by HOA bylaws, but one of the volunteers, a middle-aged man wearing a civic duty warrior sash, insisted that my drone flights constituted potential aerial menace and demanded,